Hello and welcome to Hop Along Studio. I just wanted to take a minute to thank you for watching these videos and for those who've been subscribing to my channel. I'm at almost 400 subscribers, which for me is a huge milestone and a huge accomplishment. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all your kind comments and your interest in what I'm doing here. So in today's video, we're going to be doing a scrapbooking page using alcohol inks. Really, I could have done any sort of project. I love using these for my art journal as well as scrapbooking pages. But the idea was to use a 12 by 12 piece of Yupo and being able to do something in a larger format. So I'll be using a combination of stencils and just ink blending to create this alcohol ink layout. So let's get started. Okay, so to start with, we want to add just some alcohol inks onto this page. Just a bit of alcohol onto the page just to kind of spritz it to help the alcohol ink start moving. And I'm going to start by using aquamarine. And maybe a little bit of stream. And I'm using a little bulb that I used for cleaning my lenses on my camera to help move this around a little bit. Actually, now I'm going to add in a little bit of alcohol blending solution because that helps the ink move a little bit more. I'm going to add in some pool and some cloudy blue. You can see as you move it, it starts blending with the other colors. So I actually like using alcohol blending solution a little bit more than just straight alcohol. Both of them have different uses. So now I've thrown in some bottle, some clover, a little bit of citrus. And why not add some tranquil, a little bit of the metallic alcohol pearls as well. And this is it's basically play at this point. Like I am not looking for, I'm just throwing color on and seeing what happens. I actually plan to add a few more layers to this. So this is just basically a base layer to kind of get some color down. And yeah, these bulbs you can really get at any photography store. I think I spent $10 on this one. I know Tim Holtz has a Tim Holtz branded one as well. If you like using his brand, they're definitely good too, I'm sure. Notice his were quite a bit bigger, and it wasn't something that really worked for the size of my hand. But again, we're all different, and what we like is different. And so I'd say just find something that really works for you and that you can manipulate easily. And again, now by adding in some butterscotch, all of a sudden I'm getting these kind of greens and browns and blues, and it's mixing the colors a little bit more. And it's something about understanding your color wheel quite well when you're doing this type of work. It's amazing the color combinations you can get depending on what you test and play with. And it's nice getting some of the dark spots and some of the light spots in here. And again, by adding alcohol, you get some different movement in here as well. And it's kind of fun to re-wet some of this paint that you've already put down. You end up getting some different combinations when you actually re-wet. And I'm actually now going to go in and use a Tim Holtz dabber with just a piece of foam. I'm going to add in a little bit of the alcohol solution on here. And I'm going to tap this around a little bit because I do want to try to get it to mix a little bit more interesting in some places. In this case, because I've actually only made this an 11 by 11 sheet, and I'm trying to do a 12 by 12 scrapbooking paper. And then I already have a border, so I don't really need to worry about leaving a lot of stuff at the edges to make sure that there's white space, because I am going to actually have white space. Let's add a little bit more citrus. A little bit of rainforest green, and I'm actually going to add in a tiny little bit of rust as well. On top here I'm adding some more of the alcohol blending solution because I actually do want to add a little bit more variation to this top area. I'm actually going to try to set this more like sky and ground, and so by adding a little bit of blue, and I'm actually going to add in a little bit of the purple as well in here as well, because I do want to try to have a little bit more variation in color instead of having it all of it look the same. And you can see kind of how a lot of this stuff will move and kind of resist each other. So it's something to be said about as you're laying this stuff down, just to kind of see what you can end up with. But a lot of this is just experimentation. I'm actually going to be throwing some stencils on top of this as well and adding additional layers. So this is just basically my base layer, just to play around with color and kind of see what I can get. So it doesn't take super long for this to fully dry. So now that it's dry, I'm going to start adding my next layers on top of this. I'm going to start by adding in some additional colors on top. Something to be aware of when you're adding stenciling, that you are aware of the color underneath. Every time you actually add more alcohol ink to it, it is going to re-wet and is going to react. So something to be really aware of, like as you work, so that you don't end up with a lot of brown and muddy mess. In this case, I am going for a little bit more neutrals for this, so I'm actually okay with a little bit more mud, quote unquote, but I do want to make sure that some of the colors do come through vibrantly. So I'm going to start with a little bit of 99% alcohol just on the areas that I'm going to be working. So as you can see, it's already re-wetted a little bit. So again, I'm working with green, so maybe I'll start in with a little bit of yellow. I'm actually going to try some red. I'm not sure how this is going to turn out. Might be asking a bit much, but we'll see. I'm going to start by pushing a little bit of the color through the stencil. You can see it's not coming out the true color of the red, but at the same time, it's not bad. And maybe this is where I add in a tiny bit more coral or another color. I'm going to add some coral. Let's see how coral works. Yeah, I think that's actually working okay. So again, tap and move. And as you can see, it's seeping around underneath the stencil, so we're going to see how that affects the colors underneath. And I was aware that when I was doing this, that I was going to be affecting the colors underneath. It's part of the technique. If you don't think that's where you want to go with it, then I would say just stick with your background and don't add stenciling on top. But part of this exercise is just to see how far I can take things and actually have it turn out really nicely still. And so I'm going to add in a little bit more yellow here. In this case, I am using Sunshine Yellow, which is quite vibrant and should actually work quite well with the green. So up in this area, because I already have purple going, I think I'm going to add a little bit more purple in, just because I can kind of get away with it. Again, working kind of color on color. And it should hopefully not react badly with what's already going on here. Throw in some plum. I'm going to throw some of that red back in, the Deception, the center of the flowers. Maybe some darker green in this section down here. It's already dried a little bit. Alcohol ink dries quickly at the best of times, and I live in a very dry climate, so it's always a little bit worse. I'm going to add some stream in just to add a little bit of blue in there instead of just having it all green. Because I have extra ink kind of laying on top here, I'm just moving it over here so I don't necessarily have to use a whole bunch of extra ink to get it to go into all these little spots. I actually can see it's not really seeping in very much, so I'm going to actually have to add a little bit more in here to make it work the way I'd hoped. So I'm going to leave that to dry, and then once that's dry, I'm going to pull up the stencil and we'll move on to the next step. So I've now let this fully dry overnight, and now I'm going to take the stencil off and see what we have. So I think that's pretty cool. It has some more interest to it. I probably, if I was going to do this again, I would probably not do such a dark background. But the next thing I'm going to end up doing is actually blending in these edges And I may actually add in a couple other little stencils below. So we'll move on to maybe adding a few of the stencils, and then going to work on trying to get rid of some of these lines. So now that we've removed the stencil, you can see that we have a border here. I was originally going to add some more stencils to this, but I'm a little bit worried that I'm going to end up with a little bit of a mess. I feel like this is lots, and I'm going to add layers in different ways to this project instead. So how do we clean up this line? There's a few different ways you can go about it. So to clean up these lines, I think what I'm going to actually do is take a little bit of the alcohol blending solution and add it to my ink blending tool. I'm going to try to very gently remove the line without making too much of a mess of the background. So it's still leaving a little bit of a line, so I think I might go in with some more color. Actually, I'm finding that using the alcohol instead of the blending solution seems to be working a bit better. Everything has its place. The question comes down to figuring out which medium helps you blend in the way that you want to see your blend go moving forward with these pieces, because you don't have to stick with just one thing. I think the question is figuring out what's most effective. So in this case, I figured out that blending solution isn't my best option. Throwing in some clover, some sunshine yellow. I might just adjust that whole bottom section there to something a little bit more appealing for me. Because that's looking really quite dark to me, maybe a little bit more than I want it to be. I'm actually going to just spritz a little bit of bubble wrap with alcohol and lay it on top. Actually going to do the top of it where it's a little bit uneven. I think I'm happier with that. Just wanted to get a little bit more texture in there so it didn't all look like a mistake, that it actually had a little bit more interest to it. I think that's a pretty good background to start with on my scrapbooking page, and I'm going to go from there. So we have this lovely piece of alcohol ink paper. What to do with it next? I'm going to create this into a scrapbooking page, and I'm actually using some Creative Scrapbooker Superstock, and I am going to just adhere this to the page and we'll go from there. So once you've adhered your UPO to the white paper, the next thing you want to do is add your image. I chose to map my focal image, again, tying in the white again, and as well, this allows it to have a little bit more contrast from the background. As well, I have these mushroom embellishments that I made. These are actually made using a stenciled image where I added all of the black that you see as doodles. If you'd like to see my process video for this, making this embellishment, I did include it in a link below. And so I'm just going to add a couple different layers of these just so that you, again, have a little bit more interest in your layout. Then I want to actually put my sediment in, and I always say, oh dear, every time I see a deer. It's like my husband's and my joke. So I thought, oh dear would be a great little title for this page. So I'm going to set this aside and work on that title. So I'm going to stamp my sediment. I'm using just some white cardstock that I have, and I'm using these Wild Whisper capital letter stamps. And so you want to start by lining up your letters. And you're going to want to make sure that they're actually very, very level and that you do pay attention to where they begin and end. This is a pretty forgiving stamp set, but at the same time, I do like to try to have them look the way they were intended to look, so a little bit more level. And I've decided to use wild honey. And I love these Tim Holtz gridded stamp blocks. They make this so much easier. So the one thing you want to be aware of is when you have two E's and you only have one E, I do try to line them up and consider where they're going to fall. So I kind of place the first one so I just know how much of a gap to leave. And then I basically place it in the second spot. That way I can come back in after and just fill that in. And I'm going to restamp the E. So the next thing I'm going to do is I've decided I actually want to add a little bit of embossing powder to this image. I don't have any wild honey embossing glaze, but I do have this yellow fossilized amber, and that will actually work quite well with these stamps. I'm just going to not do all of the stamp. I'm going to add a few highlights where I think the light would be hitting the letters. And that will add some interest, but it won't necessarily be everything being the exact same color. Before we do this, the important thing to do is take this little pad. It has like powder in it, and this is going to make these less sticky, so that when I actually do put embossing powder on it, it will only stick to the spots where I actually use the distress embossing pens, and it's not just going to do everything. In this case, I'm going to use the bullet tip. And now I'm going to add the embossing powder. So see, it hits some spots, but not others. And now I'm going to use my heat embossing gun to heat set. So now you can see, instead of just being one really flat looking letter, now I actually have some highlights, a little bit of dimension to it. And again, because I'm using the embossing glaze, which is semi-translucent or semi-transparent, the nice thing about it is, again, you see the layer of color, but it doesn't detract and completely remove the color underneath. So now the next thing I'm going to do is cut these out. So now that you've done your title, the next thing to do is just adhere everything down. And to finish off this page, I'm going to do a little bit of journaling on the bottom. And I would not usually do this in fluorescent yellow, but it isn't always easy to write on the Yupo paper and have it seen really well. So I'm just going to do a little bit of journaling on the bottom. Actually, I'm going to use the bright green. I've decided instead of using the bright yellow, I'm going to use the bright green. You are going to see it a little bit on the page, but it's going to blend in a little bit, but that was kind of the point. The journaling on this page is not the focal point. It is the picture and the art here. So there you go. This is the completed page. So a little bit of room for journaling that you can see very closely, but again, doesn't detract from the rest of the imagery. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, if you could like it, subscribe to my channel, and maybe provide a comment below on what you liked about it. As well, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. I also have my website, hopalongstudio.com, where I have other artistic ideas to help you with your creative self-care. I hope you have a really great week, and I will see you next time.